Good evening to you. Jiva Korja. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is our 62nd, where I am in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And today is a special day, so here in Ireland, Nollaig Naman Honeyeve. So today is Nollaig Naman, which means in English Women's Christmas. So there is a tradition where on the 6th of January, women would celebrate their own Christmas. It didn't happen in my family where the men folk would, this is my family of origin, of course, because my father didn't cook for us, but where the men would cook dinner for the women on Nollaig Naman. Anyway, I've had a nice lunch today that was cooked for me. So welcome, everybody. And just let me know where you're from. There's New Hampshire, great. Hi, Blake. Hannah from Wales, Germany. Lynn and John from Ardnamurchan, Colorado. Devon, lovely to see you. Austin, Texas, wonderful. Hi, Ava from Belgium. Where are we? Ulster, Soggy Slough, and Crouch End. And cold London. It's not so bad. It's about 4 degrees here in Ireland. Although I thought it was going to be much, much colder. And from County Louth, and ciao Elvira from Italy. Lovely to see you all. It's just wonderful. Great. And Skegness and North Hampshire, New York, Hammond, Indiana, lovely. Wales, just lovely. Great. Ohio. So Finland, oh, lovely. And of course, Killaloe and Chicago. Wonderful. So let me all introduce you to my guest this evening. We're going to Ireland, and I would like to introduce you to Aman Kwatra, who... good evening, Aman, and you're so welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Eimear. It's such a delight to be here with you.
And of course, judging by your accent, it's not an Irish accent, even though you are in Dublin. So just tell our viewers where you're from originally.
Well, I grew up in India. I spent the first about 20 years of my life there in Delhi and in Mumbai. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to England, spent a few years in England and Scotland doing my education, and then had the calling to come to Dublin about 5 years ago now, roughly.
I'm always curious as to why people choose. I mean, you were in England and Scotland, so why would you come to Ireland?
Oh, it's an interesting story. I thought I would stay there, and I went to the University of St. Andrews. I fell in love with Scotland. As well. It was absolutely wonderful there. But then I went back to India. I taught psychology for a couple of years. And then I got an offer from Trinity College in Dublin to do my doctorate. Mm-hmm. I'd always had this, it's a silly idea perhaps, but ever since I was young, I imagined myself being in Trinity College. Now, I thought of Cambridge. Growing up, as fate would have it, I got an offer from Trinity College Dublin, and the course there was fantastic. I was quite delighted that I was given this opportunity. That's what brought me to Dublin. But I don't know if I've ever told you this. When I landed in Dublin and when I went to Trinity for the first time, it almost felt like I've come home for the first time. I don't know, in ever. Felt like I want my bones to be buried here. It just felt so safe and right.
Okay, so you're a psychologist. So are you clinical or counselling psychologist?
Counselling psychologist.
Like myself. Okay, and of course, yes. I was a clinician too.
Yes. In fact, I was just thinking back earlier to how we met at the psychology conference.
It's wonderful how I've met my guests here initially, and this wasn't through Druidry, but through psychology that we met. And then I think after that, that's when you joined the order, was it?
That's right. It was only after meeting you that I learned more about OBOD and decided to join the Bardic grade. Still on that. Absolutely delightful taking my own journey. So another strange coincidence, if I get this right, is you had initially read this book called Arwen Alone. Is that correct? Am I mistaking that? The Solitary Path.
No.
No. Okay.
Me. Somebody else, maybe.
Maybe. So I was at the time reading this book called Alvin Alone, which was about druidry as a solitary path
Okay.
and practicing druidry on your own. And it was just a coincidence that at the conference, merely a couple of months later, we met and you introduced yourself as a druid. I remember, like, oh my God, moment for me.
Well, it's interesting because I haven't read that book, but when I joined the order, I didn't want to be a member of a group. I knew that you could be a solitary druid, and that suited me because in my notion about it is like, I don't want to be in a group. And of course,
I see.
that has not unfolded. And that's so many of our members and so many of our viewers are solitary druids. It may be by choice, but also because of where they're living in the world and not having access to druids living nearby. So
Yes.
glad to have found a home within the order, and obviously there's nothing solitary now about my life. So
Nothing solitary when you're the chief. It's quite delightful because I remember one of our first conversations was we met in that conference on psychology and nature as healing.
That's right.
And we had these all these herbs and plants with us on the table, and you were intricately describing each of them. I was just so fascinated how you knew so much about all those herbs and just that sense of connection. I think at that time I was looking at reconnecting myself with nature and spirituality and the planet. So it was a beautiful timing.
Funny, I remember meeting you, but I have no memory of me talking about the plants. But because which was in a hotel, and it was lovely at something like a psychology conference to bring in nature. I think that was the first time I was ever at a psychology conference where that happened. So things are changing, and it's lovely to have that shift. We're bringing in nature into so many other things.
Absolutely, it's the call of the hour. I would say long overdue, but
absolutely, yeah.
It's like the spirit is awakening.
So, when you think of, I mean, you're living in Dublin now, but where you came from in India, what's that landscape like? And how do you, as an Indian druid, for example, living in Ireland, how do you, I suppose, bring in, because obviously we are influenced by our backgrounds and our upbringing and our prior landscapes. How do you weave that in to your practice as a druid now?
Right. Wow, that's a very interesting question to me, because when I was growing up in Delhi, I have pictures of myself. I don't know how and why my parents have taken those, but I have pictures of me meditating under trees as young as probably 6, 7, and so on. And I always had this fascination for the mountains, going to the mountains. It almost felt like home in the mountains. And the Himalayas are quite close to the north, up where Delhi is. So my early memories are of going to those mountains.
Okay.
I think my first moment of awakening, though, was when I fell off one of those mountains. We were trekking down as part of a school trip, and I don't know how it happened, but I have a moment of blacking out completely and slipping off the edge of the cliff. And the next thing I remember, that I was hanging from a branch of a tree.
Oh my goodness.
And I had to be pulled up by friends and teachers, and it was all fine. I got up, wasn't really shaken. It's only when I got down back from that trek and I looked up at the mountain that I started crying and started shaking. But it was a real moment of awakening, and I lost my fear of heights after that.
I mean, that's so paradoxical to fall. Because I was going to say, how do you fall off a mountain? You can fall down a mountain, but you fell off a cliff, and were saved by a tree. And I mean, talk about what do you call that thing when you? My mind is gone. When you force somebody with a phobia, flooding. I mean, I mean, how incredible that is that you got rid of your fear of heights, having fallen off a cliff. Well, I suppose that was the worst thing you could have thought would have happened to you, and it did.
Precisely, it's like been there, done that sort of a moment, or exposure therapy at its extreme.
Yeah.
Since then, the journeys to the mountains kept on going.
Uh-huh.
I was quite inclined at that time to undertake some of the pilgrimage routes in India. So there's a mountain glacier called
Hmm.
Gangotri, which is the origins of the Ganges. That another one called Yamunotri, which is the origin of the Yamuna River. Both of them very sacred rivers in India.
Okay.
So I made those pilgrimage treks up there, and it was absolutely fantastic. It's just the mountains feel so. I don't I kind of lose my words when I think about it. It just feels so right. So again, there's a connection that I can't always put in words.
Wow. And did you make those when you were very, very young? I mean, when you made those pilgrimages, that
Uh,
wow.
no, I made those pilgrimage later in more in my teens. Earlier, it was more going to the mountains with parents and school trips. But as I grew older and I started traveling on my own, essentially, I would only go to the mountains every opportunity I got.
Even as a teenager, I consider that young to be doing those kind of things. In terms of, I was asleep in my teens, so I'm always impressed when somebody starts a spiritual path in their teens. They kind of haven't woken up earlier. So you were doing that then. Wow.
I was. I think I've read more of the spiritual texts and practiced yoga and meditation throughout my early childhood and my teens, especially. Did a lot of that growing up. There was this sense of calling, which I had a rebellion stage much later, and
Go on. Tell us about that.
I think after years, I think when I was growing up, I learned a lot from meeting people who were spiritual in their own right, as well as from a lot of books. But I also think I was quite immature to understand a lot of those things. It's too young.
Yeah.
So it was taking a lot of those archetypes and stories and mythologies quite literally, as opposed to looking at it from a spiritual story
Mhm.
and the symbolisms behind that. That came much later. So, well, it's still coming, but so when I spent a lot of my time studying yoga, as expressed by Vivekananda and Aurobindo Ghosh primarily,
Okay.
two really reverend spiritual yogis in India. And I even grew up in an organization. Schooling was linked to what's known as the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, which
Okay.
is a fantastic place, really. But there was a lot of emphasis on meditation and self discovery. It wasn't like a doctrine was put on us. It was almost like you have a calling, figure it out.
Lovely.
Mm. So when I started a lot of my meditation, well, there was always a fascination with, I suppose, miracles and magical powers and occult
Mm.
sciences. But my main attention went to dreams.
Okay.
Um, a lot of I think I've maintained a dream journal for a very long time, and there are dreams from like when I was 9 or 10, dinosaurs and volcanoes and things like that. But they're there. It's a lovely record of my dreams. But as I practiced more of my meditation and my spirituality, a lot of those dreams started changing quite rapidly and quite early. A lot of those dreams were very, very vivid. They were
Yeah.
almost as real, if not more real, than life as we live it.
Okay.
Very brief. There was one, I think I would say 7 or 8 dreams at most over a period of 10 years. But the intensity of those dreams at that time, it felt like there was some kind of revelations and some kind of visions being brought. Um, that guided me a lot. But again, I think I was a little too young to understand what was going on.
And when you think of those dreams now, I mean, because obviously you've recorded them, can you make any links now to how your path is unfolding now? Are there any, when you look back, or when you read them, if you read your journal again, are there any clues as to where you are now, but you wouldn't have been able to see them then?
Yes, so even my approach to dreams has changed a lot after doing psychology and understanding that a lot more, being more familiar with Jung, but also with other schools and of thoughts about dreaming. But when I look back, some of those dreams still stay with the message that I had understood them. Some have changed, but if I may share one or two.
Please do.
There was one early dream I had about being in an ashram in Pune, and it was raining. I was with some of my friends, and they'd all hurried back to the bus. But I put on my raincoat, and I went inside the ashram. And as the rain was falling on me, that the coat that I was wearing changed its color to saffron. And I went inside, and I saw a priest sitting there by the fire, a Hindu priest, doing a yagna. It's like a prayer. And I sat with him, closed my eyes, and then there was this kind of a chant in the background. And he said, or there was a voice which said that today you will receive a siddhi. A siddhi means a kind of a revelation, a kind of a power, kind of a almost like a divine gift. And I think that was the start of me really going in depth with knowledge. Taking the two goals I made my life aspiring to at that stage was knowledge and beauty. Those were the two virtues I took on as the meaning of my life. And a dream 10 years later, or maybe even 15 years later, was similar. I was in another ashram, and there was this, I was about to faint. Now, these are extremely vivid dreams. Like, it's almost like being in I don't know what that means, but what I would say is 4 dimensions. So you're really present of everything around you. And at that point, there was this chant happening in the background, and I was quite dizzy. I fainted. There was complete darkness, a kind of pain in my heart that I've never felt before or since. But also there was light emanating from the heart. And the voice said that now begins the journey of self-discovery. And that's when psychology happened a few years later. Yeah. No dream since then of that quality or depth.
Wow. It's incredible. So Hannah says here, do you think color is really important in a dream? Because you said you talked about your raincoat changing color to saffron.
That's quite interesting. I would say because the colors are so vivid in those kinds of dreams that I do look at their significance or their meaning to me in Hindu mythology, in Hinduism. Saffron is a very spiritual color. And a lot of the yogis traditionally had the saffron clad. So growing up with that kind of a philosophy worldview, I wouldn't be surprised that my dream created that color around me. But it's also about that significance to yourself, because if I grew up in a different kind of a culture or religious belief, then I presume those colors would be reflected with similar meaning.
Okay. As Shanti says, I lived in Pune when I was a girl, and I did visit Osho's ashram on a daily basis. So it's awesome that you mentioned that as one of your dreams. So,
what I didn't fully mention was I was listening to Osho and studying Osho a lot at that time. And the voice, now I can't be for sure, but the voice reminded me of Osho's voice at that stage, of saying that now begins a journey of self-discovery, because a lot of other things I was reading wasn't necessarily in Well, it was all English, but Osho was very prominent in English as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was interesting. I visited the ashram, the Osho ashram myself. Never went inside, only went to the gardens.
Okay.
Again, meditated there by the statues of the Buddha. Um, and I've always been interested in his philosophy.
Hmm. And somebody has a question. Do you miss dreaming like that?
Yes and no. I mean, a part of me would absolutely jump and say that absolutely. Those dreams they were intense. They were beautiful. There was
Hmm.
a dream I had once of I was with a disciple of Sri Aurobindo, and we were standing on the balcony, and I felt that I wasn't somehow being present. So I walked to him and I was apologizing for not being fully present. And he just pointed me to the sky,
Hmm.
which and there was something spinning. And suddenly the dream changed its depth and dimension, became a lot deeper. And what was spinning, I looked closely and went closer and there was the earth spinning in front of me. And the earth became bigger and came closer and closer until everything was light in the earth and everything had disappeared. So I definitely miss those kinds of experiences. But at the same time, I've been so much more connected to this reality, to life as we're living it. So there's the physical life and the mental and spiritual life. And I think the last 5 years has been about me reconnecting with the physical aspect of life. So as much as I miss those dreams, I
Hmm.
love the reality I'm living in at the moment.
Wonderful. And Hannah, again, have you deciphered all your dream meanings, or is there one that you're stumped on?
But to be honest, Hannah, I feel I'm stumped on each and every one of those dreams because my sense of evaluation also changes. Um, what I've explained right now is only, I suppose, a more literal expression of what I saw in those dreams. The spiritual or, I suppose, psychological significance of that keeps changing for me. Sometimes I look into old myths and old stories, which is a passion of mine and something I'm trying to grow into.
Hmm.
And suddenly a new meaning comes. There's a sculpture of Aphrodite behind me. I don't know if you can see it. It's there in
No,
the
she's
back.
hiding behind the chair.
But again, even there, the connections between Greek mythology, old religions of the mother goddess, as well as a lot of the Hindu approaches to the gods and goddesses, are just finding so many overlaps and
Hmm.
connections that is just changing as I'm changing. I suppose new insights are being revealed.
I think I know that myself that meanings become revealed to us in layers. That
Yeah.
um, experiences or dreams can be so profound that they appear in layers. They're not just one complete whole. I can hear laughing. Is that your background?
That is my background. That's 1 second. Is this better?
Yeah, I think so. That's fine. Somebody's
I'll
having.
close the window if that continues.
No. It's fine. It's lovely to hear that. So somebody said this is very calming. Just listening to you chat. That's from Jane, which is really
Oh,
nice.
thank
Um,
you.
so you come from a Hindu background, yeah?
Oh, yes and no. I come from a Sikh background.
Okay.
Uh, my family was more spiritual than religious. I have a huge influence in my life of my grandmother, who was quite into spirituality.
Uh-huh.
And I, during an early age, I was encouraged to explore all religions and all beliefs rather than just believe in one.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of the Hinduism, it was always philosophy for me more than religion, because I grew up in the Aurobindo Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh ashram, and his approach to Hinduism, which was a lot about the evolution of consciousness.
Okay.
It's about how the divine represents itself through different stages of evolution, starting with blind matter, unconscious matter, and how we're slowly becoming more aware of the divine presence in ourselves and growing into becoming, in a sense, the next stage of human evolution. So that's what was my primary understanding, that life is an evolution.
Uh-huh.
And with first opportunity that a species have had on Earth to become actively participating in their own evolution rather than just being guided by nature.
So it's a proactive thing rather than a passive process. Is that what you're saying?
It can be an active thing, but that's what requires aspiration and effort and fighting against those. I wouldn't say, I suppose fighting is the wrong words, overcoming those earlier forms of consciousness which were more instinctual and more blind.
Okay. So it's about awakeness, awareness.
Mm.
Okay.
It's about manifesting that which we can be.
Yep. And of course, that fits in very well with Druidry, because you've
It
mentioned
does.
times about those dreams about, I can't remember what you actually said, but your life as it unfolds, that you and that openness that you've been handed, or that freedom to achieve wholeness, or however you want to call it, and exploring your own path. And of course, in the order, this is what is encouraged, is that we find our own path. We may have go through the same teachings as in when we receive the course, but how we walk on that path is so different and so individual to the person. And that we have, every month you get 4 lessons in your envelope, or if you're online, it's a different one. But I remember I got the hard copy. And that, but everybody's journey is different, and it all takes different times. And that's that. It allows a lot of an invitation to be awake and to co-create our path as we move on, and to reflect.
Exactly. It's that sense that we're all going to be on a different journey at a different time, and that's okay. We don't always have to look into each other, who's reached where.
Exactly.
As I was growing up, I suppose more towards my late 20s or early 30s, it was more about, I want to reject everything which happened during those teenage years, all the spirituality. I just want to have a very rational view of things. So Socrates was an idol. Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Fry, all the advocates of science and rationality helped me open another chapter in my life, which was about critically assessing my beliefs, letting go of all beliefs which aren't working anymore, looking at beliefs which are actually having an impact on my life. So just before I met you, if anyone mentioned spirituality to me, during those 4 years, I'd just be like, all right, time for us to sit down and have a conversation.
You're going to put them right.
That's what I thought. I suppose I was so impacted by not being connected with myself at a physical level, always being in my mind, in my head, and experiencing amazing things, but it was never meeting the kind of reality which I was living, with the kind of sadness and the upsets and the tragedies of the world. So I actually trained in filmmaking. That's what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I did my first degree in filmmaking. And then I thought I was going to make films on political science, issues of the world, until I realized I actually didn't understand them. So I gave up that idea of filmmaking and decided to study international politics and war. So I spent 2 years studying war studies and politics. In some ways, I like to tell myself, you know how the Druids historically had those 20 years of training in which war, diplomacy, psychology, astronomy, all of that.
Yes.
I like to tell myself that, okay, ticked a few boxes there.
It's wonderful. So then what brought you into psychology then from war studies?
So I went to Sri Lanka as part of my research after the conflict was over. And that had a profound impact on me, looking at the redevelopment, but also how devastating the war was. Meeting up with internally displaced persons and refugees. And I came back, started teaching international relations and world history at Mumbai, but then started working in a think tank as well for peace and policy development. I just realized that I wanted to work therapeutically with people affected by conflict, not necessarily at a think tank or a policy level. So I decided to make a switch so I can work with refugees and people affected by conflict. That's what led me to St. Andrews to convert to psychology. So I did a conversion course, a master's there.
Ah, okay. Wow.
It's a bit like this journey, whatever it is. I'd love to put a nice label on it as a journey of self-awakening, more like a journey of confusion for most of my life.
I lived in Lesotho. I came back 30 years ago, and it's surrounded by South Africa. And I remember when I would drive from Maseru, which is the capital where I lived in Lesotho, the mountain kingdom, very mountain and hilly, through the Orange Free State to Johannesburg, and you'd see the road ahead, and if a car went ahead, it never reached the horizon. And I don't like roads like that. I love twisty roads, and that seems to be your journey. Is that because you can't see the way ahead? And I think it's so fascinating. And mine was the same. Never a clear road ahead. This is where I want to go, and it's up there. But always this windy, twisty, labyrinthine road journey, and that seems to be what your journey was.
I think you described that so well. It's also, you've got a map that you don't fully understand.
That's right.
There's some mirages on the way. and,
exactly.
and some beautiful places to stop as well.
Beautiful. And it's supposed to be able to stop and enjoy those and see what emerges for you. So Philippa says it's about ourselves experiencing rather than just following. Oops, it's gone up sorry about this. It's gone up following others' reality. They may be similar. We all see things differently. And this is a bit humorous. Gosh, Bollywood Druids. Now there's a thing. So this is with the filmmaking and the Druidry. But I think you've left your filming behind. So
I think so for now, anyway.
And then she says, Aman, that's so very humble to find a vocation of care and compassion.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you did your degree in your conversion course in St. Andrews, and then to Ireland to
the doctorate.
To do the doctorate. Okay. Mm-hmm. And where are you working now?
I'm working in an organization called Spectrum. It's with corporate mental health.
Oh, okay.
So I'm here in Ireland. It's lovely. I think it's a absolutely wonderful organization. It's one of those organizations which actually believes in what they do about mental health. So it just feels a great fit.
That's lovely. Stefan says that dream seems to have been an insight into your quest for knowledge. And somebody else, that's what I was thinking too. So it's really fascinating, the seeds of your becoming having kind of shown themselves so long ago.
It's quite unbelievable. It feels like it's one of those things that seek and it shall be given. We don't always know what we are seeking for, but there's a beautiful expression in Hinduism. In fact, Sri Aurobindo explained it quite well. He talks about the 4 aspects of the Divine Mother, going back to the female view of creation. the divine goddess. The four aspects he talks about that have manifested on earth. There are more, but four which have manifested. One is Mahasaraswati, which is the youngest of them, who has never failed mankind or humankind in their journey and struggles with them as they work through all the layers of ignorance and unconscious to awaken. And the other aspects can't fully manifest themselves until a few changes happen within us. For example, CBT, like if we start becoming aware of our thoughts and feelings and behaviors a lot more, we suddenly realize, okay, I'm not the voice in my head. I'm not just that. And I don't have to take every thought that comes to me. In similar ways, that would be seen, I suppose, as a revelation of the separation of the mind body, but also the layers in the mind. So it has been self-awakening, but it's also letting go of my own beliefs. It really began with getting myself out of the cage of my own creation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know Philip, in one, I think it's one of his books, like Druids hold their beliefs lightly, and that is something around holding that lightly and being able to engage like a dance and come away and then come back and move on and revisit, but not being so wedded to those beliefs, but being able to suspend them and tweak them. And again, you're talking about the ones earlier, ones that work for you and ones that no longer have, I suppose, a relevance. And I think there are beliefs or values that we have that are really important for us at a particular time in our life.
Mm.
And then they have, what would you say? They've served their purpose. And it's not about rejecting them, that's done, but that this piece of work is done. And now look to other values, other belief systems, or other insights, and see where they take us.
It's a bit like that's what you needed to see at the time, but
exactly,
there's so much more.
Exactly.
Which is quite lovely, because the ancient Druids, they didn't write down their knowledge, did they? Because I suppose one of the tendencies is once things are written, people may read them quite literally, even though the glimpse and the dreams and the visions have evolved and changed. So something quite lovely about living knowledge, sharing of that.
I agree. And yet when you think of in India, when you think of the Vedas, the Upanishads, all written down and there and still accessible, I don't know how old they are. And there's a part of me that kind of goes, oh, it's a pity they didn't write things down.
I agree.
Because there's also that loss, because, so much has been lost, I think, when you're relying on oral traditions. If they, for whatever reason, become broken, then stuff gets lost. And yet that I can see, I get the magic piece as well. And then I think we can access knowledge through the landscape and through our spiritual practice, stuff that comes in that isn't written, but that we can access it. But there's still that kind of tension between the two.
I agree. I really value the written word as well. It's also it's a balance between the two. I think the Vedas and the Upanishads especially started as oral traditions, but eventually they were written down because they were unbroken. But a lot of the Druid text, I suppose, comes from the point of view of other civilizations which observed them or conquered regions, which may or may not be reliable in its entirety.
Stefan says, and it's interesting, the knowledge was left in architecture. And I suppose we can interpret a lot from the megalithic monuments, when you look at alignments and again, what was interpreted 100 years ago is different to 50 years ago. And now when there are different understandings, say, of Stonehenge, for example, or Newgrange, the Newgrange we see now is not, it may not be what it looked like when it was built. And all of that is that more knowledge comes to us, or an awareness, and as we move along, and maybe as we waken up um, to to we often, I think this thing is always a temptation that we're looking at it through our modern lens or a very rational lens and impose that narrative on ancestors, and then realize actually no, it can be completely. And then of course, as our narratives change, then our own interpretations change, and of course it's very, very important to be able to be open to that.
Absolutely. I think one of the I suppose main learnings that I've had is the importance of listening, like truly listening. And it's not just listening to people, it's listening to the planet, it's listening to your environment, it's listening to where you are. And I'd love for the Druid text to confirm a lot of things that we are learning now, but I think we're hearing a lot of the same things.
I think so. And because I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and I've worked with healers there. And when I listen or do some reading around African worldviews and the similarities between those of our own, that there are so many universals that all over the world, Indigenous people are saying the same things, that when it comes to the planet, the earth, our relationship with the earth.
It's fascinating the amount of overlaps that there are between different cultures and civilizations and histories. It's I read this book. It's called Goddesses in Every Woman. There's also one called Gods in Every Man. But when I read those Greek and Roman interpretations of Jungian archetypes and think about similar powers and deities in Hinduism, because there's so many beautiful stories from Hinduism. It's just that other branch of knowledge is yet untapped in. But there's just so many overlaps. It's charming.
So you're coming from the background you do, your Sikh background, and now you're in Ireland and you're on the Druid path. And I'm still curious as to why you're here and not there. I know you got the call to Trinity, but what is it that you come to a very cold climate, well, a damp climate? We're not that cold, but we're damp compared to where I know you were in India just a few weeks back. What is it? I'm just fascinated. And how come you feel at home? That's not meant as an antagonistic question, but I'm really curious.
I'm so curious myself. It's almost like there is some kind of there's some kind of a magic in the land here as well. To me, there are aspects of back in India which have felt similar, particularly when I've been in those high up in the mountains. When I came here, it was almost that sense of safety. There was a sense of livingness in the land, which really stuck with me. I spent so much time in Glendalough here. Yeah. Almost every opportunity I get, I'm back there. It's the closest mountain peaks that I have access to. I don't drive at the moment, so that's slightly more limited for me. But when I'm walking there, even when I'm in Dublin, it feels there's a strange pull. It's not now. I used to believe a lot in past life and those kinds of ideas, and at the moment, I would say I don't know about those experiences. But it does feel like I'm coming back to a place I've been. It feels like I'm coming back to some place or some memories which, I don't know, in a metaphoric way, not to take this literally, but it feels like I've walked these lands before. I don't know how, but it just feels very familiar. When I came to Kilkenny to Three Castles, that was absolutely beautiful, the first experience there. Kilkenny is another place which I love to go. The rivers there, the the cobble streets. It's just absolutely, it's something very familiar. From an aspect I don't fully understand. There's a story here, Eimear, and I will tell you as it reveals itself more.
Okay. Ben says, Druids can't die. We come back. The path comes from within. So perhaps, absolutely. And Jules says this, and Jules was my guest last week. Yes, this resonates with my experience also. I found that the land felt very welcoming, and that's the only way to explain it.
That resonates a lot with me as well. The sense of welcoming and that sense of. I remember one of the first things you said to me. You introduced me once at one of the ceremonies as there's a man from India, but he's Irish. And that just felt correct in some ways. It felt very welcoming.
Yeah. It's I'm just fascinated, and it's kind of the world's becoming a smaller place, and I think it's lovely. I think it's you mentioned safety, and I think it for me it makes it a safer place as well when we have such diversity and a welcoming to diversity and to difference, and how strengthening that is. And Carola says, I think that's it. The entire world or culture spiritually can be seen as a big world. I think you meant tree, and we all sit on another branch of it. And I think that's
that's beautifully put. Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah.
I remember when I came to my first ceremony at Three Castles. I think there were 25 nationalities there of people, and it just felt so welcoming. Because as it is, coming from a different culture, I wasn't sure if I can be a druid. Is an Indian druid even a thing, or can it be a thing? Those were my earlier ideas about all this. I just feel at the end of the day, your heart speaks a different language, which may not be something which everyone can understand. But if it's true for you, then that's okay.
Yeah.
But I felt that welcome.
Oh, great. I'm delighted. Anne says, I'm finding this very reassuring. I'm always concerned about being authentic in my practice. And this conversation seems to say to me that if it feels right, then it is, even if you can't explain why. I couldn't agree with you more, Anne. And I think that is so. All you can ever do is listen to yourself. Does this feel right or doesn't it? Does it resonate with me? Doesn't. And I never know or understand that thing. Well, are you entitled to do yoga if you're Irish? Are you entitled to be a druid if you're Indian? I don't think that they're the questions to be asking. Does it feel right? And I think if you're authentic to yourself, and I think if you have that sense yourself, then your authenticity is visible to others, and you don't have to prove it. If you are authentic, you don't have to prove it, and don't let anyone ever say to you, well, you're not the real deal. I don't know what it is mean. Yeah. I just know if anyone challenges mine, it's like, well, all I can say is, this is who I am.
That's really lovely. It's really lovely, and it resonates really deeply for me as well. Can't let the world define what I should be. I want to, it was after all a journey of self-awakening. So
yes. Exactly. And Salve says, much of our ancient root culture was born out of Euro-Asia and the migration of ancient peoples following the sun westward. If we look at our Bronze Age landscape, much is replicated both in India and across Euro-Asia. And of course, Ireland, Irish, is an Indo-European language. And there are many, I think, Sanskrit roots in the Irish language. And I think that's really, really interesting. And you mentioned the Siddhis?
The Siddhis, yes.
Siddhis. Okay. Somebody mentioned that link with She, S-I for the D-H-E, the She, which the Dini She, the Hollow Hills where the She live. Is there some root there? And I don't know, but I think it's fascinating. So yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating. It's that sense of, it's like rediscovering those connections. And they're there. We just have somehow lost the spoken word around it. So there's a lot of self-discovery, or a collective discovery that we'll have to do. If we can approach each other with more compassion.
Exactly. And it's about, I suppose, grounding yourself in your Druidry, however you define it, and knowing it. And I remember at our 50th anniversary gathering, that was in, I think 2014. No, yes, 2014. And Kathleen Matthews is giving a talk. And I still remember her very last statement was, if somebody ever says to you, so you call yourself a Druid, do you? And you go, no, I don't call myself a Druid. I am a Druid. And there's something about standing in it, however it is, whether you, okay, you don't have white hair. I've long white hair, but I don't have a beard. You know, it doesn't matter. Is that you are the Druid that you are. And that's what's important. And knowing it, because it's not about being a good Druid. You know, you don't know, are you a good Christian or are you a good Muslim? Well, I don't know if you have good Hindus or good Sikhs or whatever, but I don't know what a good Druid is. And it's not important because we're not talking about piety. It's about living our own lives as Druids that are authentic to us. And it's owning it, Philippa. That's exactly it. And it's just being true to yourself.
It's hard enough being authentic to yourself.
Oh, yeah, that's a challenge. And I think if you could do that much, then you're fine.
Absolutely. It's that sense of self-acceptance is a form of self-love as well. When we deny ourselves that acceptance or we question what feels right in our heart, it's also denying ourselves that love.
Exactly. And I suppose one thing with the order is that, you know, you can bring your Sikhism or Hinduism or whatever in, bring it into your Druidic practice. It's never about having to reject something else to be a Druid. And I just love that. I love that richness that is there, that we all express it differently.
I was quite surprised at that in the start when at the first ceremony you asked everybody if anyone wanted to invite any other presence, any other spirit, any other goddess or gods of your own beliefs. I thought that was absolutely beautiful, and of of all my spiritual learnings or curiosities and my philosophies, I've always harbored a secret love for Aphrodite. So one day, when I feel brave enough, I might.
You could call her in. Oh, she'd be very, very welcome. Yes. So what is it? David says, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should listen more than we speak to increase wisdom. I can't argue with that. I think it's...
I'm listening.
And of course, you mentioned listening to the landscape. And often people have said to me over the years, oh, how can you be a Druid when it's all gone? And I go, the landscape speaks. And I think that's so, so important. And also with the teachings is, we talk about the book of nature. So if you want to learn about trees, don't be reading, you can read books about trees, and that's not to knock them, but go out and be with them and see what they have to teach you. And often the most profound message can be in the simplest of teachings or the simplest of insights or the simplest of awarenesses can be really, really really profound.
I think in Buddhism, one of the early stories of the life of Buddha when he was still the prince, Gautama, Siddhartha. Yeah. I think there's some stories about how his journey became when he was just sitting in the garden watching ants. And he was just mesmerized for hours looking at ants and them building. So I think, yeah, absolutely. Nature is one of those places where which can teach us so much even without, the smallest of things in nature can teach us so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is it? Gabriella says, I spent my birthday at 5 years old on a mountainside in the Wicklow Mountains. When you spoke of Glendalough, my heart resonated. I just had to look it up. And the photos of the landscape resonated with me once more. I remember talking to the birds there, announcing to them, it's my birthday. A beautiful memory, connection and interconnection. Thanks for connecting me to my ancestors' home.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Howard and I, we had our hand fasting ceremony, our wedding ceremony in Glendalough in the pouring rain on a summer's day. So
that's lovely. It's amazing how memories of nature and memories of being in nature and being connected with nature stay with you so deeply. One of my earliest memories is I used to love watching the stars. My earliest dreams were to be an astrophysicist, not an astronaut, an astrophysicist. I didn't even know what that meant. It meant I just wanted to study planets, as far as I was concerned at that stage. But I used to sleep on the terrace of our house to watch meteor showers in Delhi,
beautiful.
if there's such a thing. But all night in the winter with my stray/pet cats cuddled in the blanket as well. And I used to have a flashlight with me, so I used to connect with the stars with my own light and try to speak to them.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I lived in Kenya in the early 80s and in a desert where you had a complete night sky. And I had a friend, Donna Powali, who was an American, and she taught me the stars. So she had a star map. So she had a flashlight. We'd look at the map on the ground because there was no electricity. This is a desert. And then this complete black sky. And it was just fascinating. And I had learned to read the zodiac.
Wow.
And I've forgotten it now. I mean, I can still do some, but you don't have the complete because there's trees or there's mountains or something. But this was flat in a desert. To see the whole sky was absolutely fascinating. And it was just that, I just remind me of the flashlight, looking at the ground at the map and then looking up. And of course, now you can get an app on your phone and you can hold it up and just see what it is you're looking at. But it's just wonderful to have that, all that nature revealed to you, and then to know. Because I used to look at the stars and I'd say, well, they're all stars. How can you see constellations? And now I can find constellations. And once you recognize a constellation, you never unsee it. And that's just magic. It's a bit like maybe like learning to ride a bike. Once you learn to ride, you can't unlearn it. That somehow you're able to identify. I'm looking up here and I'm looking at my ceiling, not the sky, but that you can identify the spot the stars in the constellation. I think that's incredible.
I think it's so beautiful. I once saw the Milky Way, the streak of the Milky Way on a clear night, and it was so beautiful. I've never seen so many stars together.
Yeah.
Also, if I may, there was this school principal of mine who was talking once about how language in some ways is taking us away from nature. So when we label the moon, we just stop being curious about it. So I learned to see the moon many years later, and I'm still mesmerized on some days. It's like the stories, the mythology, that tell you aspects of our own psyche, but revealed in nature. Mm-hmm. So if you think of Luna, if you think about the goddess, then you look at the moon differently. If you see the earth as a living story, a living being, then we can't be so reckless, can we?
No, and it's not just the moon. And I mean, it just struck me when you said, when you name things, what's that up there? That's the moon. Oh, is that all? But when you have, it's Luna, or it's the grandmother, or it depends various cultures give them, it's our brother the moon, or our sister the moon, or our grandmother the moon, or whatever it is. And then stories, when you hear stories, it just animates the whole thing. It's just absolutely just wonderful. Pat mentions a book, and it's a great book where a guy studied 1 square meter. This is interesting. Now, he studied 1 square meter of forest for a whole year. And she says it sounds dull, but his book is crammed with events and big ideas. I think it's called The Forest Unseen: A Year's Watch in Nature. Now, that is really interesting, looking at a square meter, because the square meter is really, really small. And you think about Gautama Siddhartha looking at the ants on the tree. But that is fascinating. And there's another book called The Healing Energy of Trees by Patrice Bouchardo. He was an engineer, but he lived in a forest for 4 months, listening to the trees tell him what was going on. by listening to how he felt when he sat underneath, say, a birch tree and discovered his headache went, or he felt calmer, or if there was a tree sick, what did the tree need? And when I came across that notion, I was absolutely blown away. And it has really, really helped my relationship with trees. And I'm just really, looking at that square meter of forest or listening to a tree, and it can be the same tree. What does the tree tell you? And I just find that just mind blowing.
It's so fascinating. That reminds me of a story I heard when I was a young boy about a master carpenter who was just known for making the most beautiful furniture. And the king asked him to go into the forest and to make one of the most wonderful sculptures for his kingdom. So he goes into the forest. A month later, the king's like, okay, how are you doing? And it's like, oh, I still haven't started. So 6 months later, how's my sculpture coming? It's like, oh, I still haven't started. The king is getting more and more annoyed. A year later, he calls the carpenter back and he's like, what are you doing? Why haven't you made my sculpture yet? And he goes, I'm still waiting for a tree to give me permission to take the branch. That stayed with me. It's you have to listen.
That's right.
Can't just take things.
No, and it's that huge respect, and a tree may or may not. Just like we engage with people with their permission. I mean, it may be done. What would you say? You pick it up unconsciously, or it can be more overt. Whether you engage with somebody, and we don't assume. And it's the same with trees. I think it's beautiful. That sensitivity is beautiful. So it never happened, I take it, that he never did this.
I don't know. I think you know how the patience of kings are.
Yeah, and this is Blake says this is why animism makes sense. Trees of agency too. Absolutely, and I think it's around acknowledging that. I think is really, really important to be able to, because when any of us have agency, either we acknowledge our own agency or allow others have agency, we live in a far healthier world to be able to do that. Rosemary says, I'm not an official druid. I don't know what an official druid is, but I often listen to your conversations. Thank you. I've lived remotely in the forest in Australia for many decades. The elements and the spirit within of all nature is my teacher. Yes, I'm just, comments are flying me here. Every aspect of the interconnected nature brings new understanding, deeper respect and responsibility to Mother Earth. I love your conversation today. Thank you, Rosemary. That's exactly what it is, I think, is having that appreciation and respect for nature. I think is so important.
Sounds like an official druid.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Ben Whelan, you're both trees. I've told you I would plant you in my garden. I've seen references in the thing about trees, and I wasn't too sure what you meant. I don't know if you're talking about myself and Aman. And then Danuta's in Australia. Thank you for such a beautiful and reflective conversation. The beautiful art of listening is so powerful, particularly when we recognize the inherent awareness of life in all its forms. Absolutely.
That's so kind. Thank you.
Yeah. And then Shanti said, I had a wonderful dream, lovely, not too long ago, where I said to my family, see the wonderful dance that exists between everything. We are all connected and motioning the infinity sign. Oh, beautiful. That's lovely.
That's beautiful.
Well, yeah. So I just love the comments here. This is David. We had a college project. Toss a hula hoop in the field and attempt to identify everything within the radius and write everything down. And it did not take very long to realize how much life is densely concentrated in small areas. If you look closer and closer, an eye-opening project. Yeah.
That's so true.
And, when you think of how big the world is, and then we talk about how small the world is, and then what a microcosm you see if you measured it like your square meter or your hula hoop, and so much life if you just give it the time and the attention. It's just beautiful.
I was thinking back to one of the earlier comments about us being a tree and being on different branches as well. It's there's the myth of Vishnu, the god of creation, who's created the world in his dream. So the whole world and the universe is Vishnu's dream.
Okay.
And so there are two aspects of it. One is the centered divine Vishnu, or I suppose the immovable. And then there is the dream, which is Prakriti and nature, the one which moves.
Yes.
And it's just the movement existing within no movement. That kind of paradoxes are just filled, and we can't always understand how they can coexist. But similarly, different beliefs and different dreams and different aspects of our life can coexist even if we don't understand them.
So there's that paradoxically that thing that are solid and fluid at the same time.
It's just, I suppose, if again going back to Jung, that sense of the shadow is also part of you.
That's right.
And we can't really self-awaken if we don't awaken into our shadow as well.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And then Pat talks about, then if you think about the networks of fungi under the forest, our hula hoop or 1 square meter is connected to so much more broadly than we ever realized. I received a book, and I've mentioned it in a previous chat, Finding the Mother Tree by Susan, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name again, Canadian, who had been studying trees and took a long time to convince people when she was recognizing the mycelial networks and how trees connect with fungi. So if you're looking at a meter, square meter, how much life is there is just incredible. I've started growing mushrooms in a little box. It's not even a square meter. It's probably half a square meter. And looking at the mycelium in a box in a bag, which is in a box, and it's just a medium like rye or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the density of the fungi that are growing in there is just incredible. And the power of fungi, they communicate, they bring healing, medicine, they communicate. There's all sorts of things. And then Pat says, and then you eat them. Absolutely. It's mind blowing. And people often use the word, well, you're a fungus on the world, or you're a fungus on humanity, as if it's something negative. And in fact, no, we cannot survive without fungi.
It's how trees communicate with each other as well.
Ben likes the magical ones. They make me giggle. Well, you see, in my view, they're all magical. And then Shanti says, it appears the movie Avatar wasn't so far from the truth after all. Mind you, we don't need CGI to acknowledge nature's true beauty. Absolutely. I did like the film, though. But it's, yeah. So...
It's an interesting paradox. Again, we're making so much of virtual reality, and we're creating virtual worlds and technology like we've never seen before. That level of 3D and depth and immersion, and yet our living world is dying.
Oh, yes, it is. And I think that's one of the sad things that, is that virtual world going to... I'm sounding like a dinosaur now, or I'm sounding like, your television is going to ruin people, and the world will never be the same after moving pictures. And then there was each generation, with technological advances, the world is going to come to an end. But I do think it's great to have this platform to talk, and particularly in these last 2 years, to have this forum to be able to meet online. But it is not a replacement for meeting in the flesh. And no matter what kind of magical 3D film, it's not a replacement for actually being out in the woods, or by the sea, or on the mountains, or whatever it is, or wherever you need to be, by the river or the lake. It's not the same. It's a bit like you can read all the love stories and watch all the love movies in the world, but it's not the same, as being in an actual relationship. Now, not everybody gets lucky enough to be in a relationship, but it doesn't replace it, Yeah. And then Jules says, yes, it's a real irony, though, that we invest so much in tech, which is very destructive ecologically. And Red Ruth says, this reminds me of the saying, the signpost to the moon is not the moon. Yeah. Yeah. And Hannah says it should be a tool, not your life. Absolutely. It's something you use if it's right for you, and if not, then don't. So yeah, absolutely.
I still like that aspect of again the aspects of the Divine Mother that I was talking about, that she works through us first with our ignorance.
Yes.
Because that's where we need the work. So maybe we're starting technology, or we're doing things which are, I suppose, detrimental, but through that we'll hopefully awaken some consciousness of preservation as well.
That's true. I think sometimes, though, and I always worry that when we become very technologically advanced, and I mean, being able to drive a car as opposed to relying on a horse, or, how fast the internet is now. And you're much younger than I am, but I remember when it took ages when you did something on the computer and you had to wait. Or now you press print and it straight away it comes out, or it comes out in another room. All of that kind of stuff, that we can become full of hubris and very, very arrogant about it. And it's sometimes we always need to come back to, we're just guests here. We're not, we have to be still careful and respectful and mindful, and not always assuming that we're in control. Pat says, I remember when you had to move the beads on your computer to get the answer. It's lovely. I know. Stefan says, bring back dial-up. The internet, bring back dial-up. The internet is too fast. And then Pat says, during COVID, though, the interweb was a lifesaver, heart saver for those who live alone. I agree. A meeting of minds is better than no meeting at all. Absolutely. It's still remember that it's the physical meeting that is really, really important. If you can do it,
It's speaking of dial-up, I remember when I had that as well. I was once downloading a lecture by Stephen Hawking. Took me 8.5 hours to download that small file compared to today. And at the last minute, 99%, my cat decided to jump on the keyboard and cancel the file.
Did the cat live?
Well, she still had 7 more lives.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I mean, that is horrendous. Yes, that's just, yeah, very, very frustrating. So Pauline says, thank you for your evening's calming talk, developing our love of trees and nature and influence of Mother Earth across the world. It's interesting. I'm glad a number of people are talking about calming this conversation, and it's lovely to be able to have conversations like that. And then Blake says, though I've local Druid community, I'm ever thankful for increased international connection we've developed the past couple of. Absolutely, Blake. I mean, I'm even here. It's been great for me to have this facility and to have. Sorry. This is, when you see comments, cats have their own agenda, Blake says. And Pat says, don't mention cats. I can't see Eimear at the moment. My cat's ass is in the way. She has a very, I think it just a new arrival to the house. Can be quite destructive, but obviously Pat is very patient. And then Patrick, and I agree, fellowship cannot be replaced with pixelated screen images. Yes, however, I've actually had some really interesting connections with people on a screen. So I'm kind of pulled, but if I had to choose, give me the physical. But in the absence of, I'm very grateful that, at this time of pandemic that we've actually had the technology to be able to do this.
Just being able to connect to this wide community itself is such a blessing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, group meditations with people on all corners of the planet is really cool. Had some powerful experiences during Philip's private group meditations. I also love hearing you play your harp, Eimear. Thank you very much, David. You're really kind. Pat has just said she's not patient. He's a monster. He broke my toilet and crapped in her bathtub. I'm sorry, Pat. That is horrendous. Yes. And then Danuta says, which is really interesting, when studying Ayurveda, screen time, online work and movies are seen as highly vata, aggravating activities as a form of very refined travel. And we're advised to balance ourselves according to that. I think so. And I know I've really enjoyed having all of this, but then I find after a day of being on this, now it's not often that I work one day a week online with my clients. And by the end of the day, I'm fried. And it's like, yes, I need to get out there, get the wind in my face or rain, or just get the air in my hair, in my head. And that's really, really important, having that balance. So, and I think we need to be more mindful, because I think sometimes you get into a rut of staying stuck here in this little world. You know, talk about the square meter of forest. Sometimes it can be easy to have a square meter of your desk with the screen in front of it, and to be able to push ourselves out and then remember what it's like. Because I remember the time I would not go out if it was raining. This has gone way, way back in my life. It's too wet, it's too cold, I won't, nah. Where now I understand, my body remembers how healing it is to just to walk around the house, go out a garden, even if it's wet. You can always put a raincoat on. Mine haven't turned saffron yet, but get out there and feel it, and it's just so magical, you know. So
I remember that the last time I was there in Three Castles, it was raining. It was pouring, really.
Oh, that was for the equinox.
Yes, that's right. And it was definitely keeping me more present and alive, more than the chill. It just felt, at least with the magic of the ceremony as well, it felt like this is exactly how it should be.
Well, that was the first time in 18 years when it rained for a ceremony.
Oh, really?
It's often been raining just 2 minutes before, 5 minutes before, and it would stop for the ceremony, and then we would go on. But that day, and that was World River Day,
Yes.
we were soaked to the skin, and I wasn't cold. And nobody, I was looking around thinking, I'm waiting to see people going, can we not stop? Can we not stop? It's too cold. Nobody. And then we went down to the river to place an offering in the river. And that was magical. But that was the first time in 18 years where it lashed. And then Pat says, yes, it was appropriate, though, for the watery theme of the day. But it just fascinating how nature speaks to us or supports us. And normally I never ask that it won't rain, but I just say, thank you for the rain and thank you for holding off for the duration of our ceremony. And usually it does. And then I realized on that day, it needed to rain because it was World River Day, and we needed to have that. And people were smiling and beaming. Just one of these fascinating. Okay, so this evening has been deeply reflective for me. This is Gabriella. This is Gabby. Could I ask that you kiss the earth for me in Glendalough? Tell them I love them. Thank you in advance for this. Deeply appreciated. So the next time you go to Glendalough, Aman, if you can kiss the ground for Gabriella Aluna, she would love
certainly do that. Thank you for that.
Yes. Yeah, and then Pat says, wasn't that the day the Druids got herded by the cows? That's true. We went down towards the river and all these cows, and there was one bull there. We managed, I mean, cattle are very curious. I'm not afraid of them. But it was quite interesting.
Yeah, quite an audience at the river.
We did. And they're quite nosy. So just lovely to have those ordinary events, because I grew up in a rural Ireland and grew up with cattle, and my grandfather and my uncles were cattle dealers. So it's very ordinary, and it's just lovely to have that as part of, we're having a ceremony. You won't get that in a temple, because unless you have, say in India, I don't know if the cows go into the temples. Did they go into the buildings, or are they in the grounds?
Well, it depends where you are, really. But there are temples where you can go feed the cows and be with them. I used to do that a lot in my earlier times, just to feed the cows. It was so nice.
Oh, brilliant. Patrick, you're being very, very funny. He said, I bet that was moving. Yes, it was. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. So, and Shanti says, or just feel the rain without the raincoat. Yes, I love that feeling. It's liberating. The privilege of living in warm Australia. Yes. Not this time. It's very here in Ireland. No, very damp and cold. But I mean, I've had dance in Africa when it's raining out in the rain, and it's just like so healing and cooling in hot weather to have rain like that. And yeah, in summer here, I don't mind that, but it's a bit damp now. But yeah, but the freedom of being in the rain is just something else, and I love the sound of it. And again, of course, the elements, just beautiful.
The rains in Mumbai are always so they're so heavy, but they're so beautiful. You could just sit in the balcony and keep watching them for hours on hours. It's just.
I mean, does it? I know when I lived in Kenya and Tanzania, you might say it rains every afternoon, and then it's dry in the evening, so that it only rains for a part of every day during the rainy season. In Mumbai, does it rain for like weeks on
Days.
end?
Yeah, can rain for days, with a short stop maybe of an hour or so, but it'll go on for days.
And are you trapped in the house, or do people say, okay, I'm not even going out for 3 days, and let's hope I have enough food in the house, or you go out in the rain?
Well, yes, I'm afraid sometimes we don't have the luxury to stay indoors all the time. So people are traveling and going to work, and the trains have stopped, and then people are walking, and things can be really difficult. But being indoors on those days is pretty nice if you have a hot chocolate or something with you as well.
Does the rain cool you down, or is it hot and humid?
It can cool you down, at least when it's raining for a few days. It's really cool because the air takes a chill. Afterwards, it can get quite humid.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I find humidity, hot humidity, cold humidity is bad enough, but it doesn't get into my joints like it does for some people. But hot humidity, I find very, very hard on my skin. It just, and as I get older, I find my tolerance for it is it's getting less. So when you think about your life, well, I have no idea how old you are. You look so young, and you get mentioned all the things that you've done, and you've packed a lot in. What is the biggest challenge you've had that you've overcome?
Oh wow. There are many, but I would say one which comes to me right now as a pivotal moment of my life was seeing other people. And if I can just elaborate on that, I've always seen other people, I've always related with other people, but I think my life took a big turn when I started genuinely seeing the minds of other people as separate and independent, with their own lives and their own stories and their own feelings, not in relation to me, but in whole in themselves, who I have the privilege of connecting with, and who connect with me. But that sense of realizing that I'm one aspect of consciousness amongst hundreds and thousands of other aspects of consciousness, all complete and perfect in their own right. That moment was it was one of the biggest jaw-dropping moments of my life. It felt like I'm suddenly living in a world that's more alive than it's ever been.
That sounds wonderful. And what was it that brought you to that point? Can you remember, obviously there was a time when you weren't aware of it, and then suddenly you were, or was it like that, or what happened, or what brought that awareness about?
It was a gradual process. A lot of it happened through my personal therapy, through my therapy training, and life experiences of that time. I suppose it was at a time when I was forced to look at many dark corners of my psyche. And every time I knew there was more, I actively sought to try and see what's there. So it was almost a non-stop rolling down snowball from a hill. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. And that's when I realized, I suppose, I had to confront. I had to leave all my ideas of morals and philosophy and spirituality, everything behind, and just confront existence raw, just living and not wanting to live, and wanting to flourish and wanting to cease existing. It was just a strange mix of everything. It was a big existential crisis for me. I didn't know who I was. I was losing my sense of identity. I went back, I remember, on one of my trips, and I threw away things that I was keeping as treasures of my life for a long time. I started tearing old cards and medals and badges and awards, threw away a lot of things because I was like, this is not me. I've trapped myself in these ideas, but there's so much more. And I think that was the start of seeing other people as so much more as well.
That strikes me, that took a huge amount of courage to be able to do that, to be able to go in. And like you say, as more revealed, you went further, going down that hill and relinquishing all the things that the so-called certainties, which probably weren't certainties, but we cling to things that, or we cling to certainty as if it is a certainty when it isn't. I mean, that's one of the paradoxes. But very, very courageous of you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be on this side of it.
I bet you are.
I always thought of Plato's analogy of the cave as one of those metaphors, which really is amazing, and I would teach that to my students.
Not everybody may be aware of the story of the cave, so it can.
Sure. It's well, to put it short, it's a bit of, imagine that you were living in a cave with light coming from the outside to the inside, but all that you can see is the shadows cast on the wall of the cave. And that's the world that's the world you've grown in, the world of shadows. And then amongst the three people who's inside the cave, one of them decides eventually to step out. And they see this world, this vast world of light and color and sound and shape and smell and taste. And they come back rushing in to say, this is what I saw, this is what there is. But the others in the cave who haven't seen that, who live in the world of shadow, just can't believe that person is cast off as a liar, is threatened with death, just refuse to believe that. So it's the analogy between how we can get fixed to certain ideas about what life is and miss out on what the world is.
It's for those, and just a number of, I think I should read some Plato, thank you. You can also see on YouTube, have a lovely animated film of the cave, and explains it really, really simply and beautiful. So well worth having a look at to explain. If you haven't time to read Plato, I don't know how long the film is. It's maybe 20 minutes or something, but it's just a lovely idea because the animation is beautiful in it. And that takes huge courage again, or for the first person to go out of the cave and to have.
I don't feel that. I don't feel that I was the first person to get out of the cave in my life. I felt that I was the one still staring at the shadow, and this is believing. Okay. So it was a profound moment when I turned my head and actually believed that there was something else, or not even believed, when my face was turned to something I was not seeing. That's when everything started changing.
Wonderful. Julie, you said, what was that animation? It's just, if you put into YouTube Plato's Cave, it should come up. And I don't know, there might even be a few versions of it, but it's there on YouTube, Plato's Cave. Yeah, it's. I think often it's a challenge when we are locked into one worldview, and even if it's very, very narrow, but when we're stuck in that, it's like, well, it doesn't matter what anyone else is saying to you. I know what I know, and I see what I see, and I'm seeing shadows, and I'm not seeing any color, and I don't know any smells and tastes and textures or any of that. And then it's just that, I don't know, is it a lucky moment or something that something encourages you to just to look a little further, and then you spot something, and then you go, oh, might be, and then off you go. And then, of course, there's the time. The right time for it, and I think when you've been in that living in the shadow and then you take a step out, I think you can really, really appreciate it. Because, you know, if you've been out there all the time and you don't know what I think it's important to experience that life in the cave as well.
I think that's at the root of my compassion, because I know what that shadow world looks like. And I'm sure I'm still seeing a lot of shadows, but there's compassion for that.
And Vince, Patrick, I agree. Taking the first step into the unknown from the traditions you were raised in can be very frightening. I've done it, absolutely. And I think being able to take that first steps are really, really important. And Vincent says the shadows prove the sunshine. They do, because if you absolutely. But I think it's very humbling. And I think when we've recognized our own fears and our own cavedness, if that's a word, that we have far more compassion for other people. I think that's really, really important. And Julie says, I love this story today. I'm just stepping out of the cave. Had a brilliant career, but now it's time for creative pursuits to dominate. Gunairi Lath, Julie, that's an Irish. May you rise, may you succeed. And I think Stephanie has put in, it must be, you've put in a YouTube link, and I imagine that's the one, and Pat did the same. So thank you for that. So Ben says, I like my cave, it's windy outside. Caves aren't bad. You know, caves give us shelter, you know, and people have lived in caves, and it's really, really important. It's about being able to, you know, you sleep in the cave at night and then being able to go out during the day when it's not windy, when it's not raining. So it's when a crab sheds its shell, it hides under a rock until its new, larger, more robust shell hardens. Absolutely. Pat said she'd rather have a hobbit hole. Okay. I think that's because you can have a second breakfast. I'm not so sure. And then Lisa says shawls and blankets are helpful. But absolutely. So it's around in our journey. And I think going through the Gwers and as a druid, because certainly with the order, the teachings, it's a spiritual path, but it's also a personal development part, as I'm sure you've noticed. It's quite a lot of psychology in there, thanks to Philip. And
you.
Well, he's done the teachings. I'm just I'm riding along on his slipstream, but that it's very much a personal development path, and that it can allow us. And I know so many people who talk about how going on this journey, how it has opened them up. And I imagine they may not have used the metaphor of the cave, but were able to step out and to see new ways of being in the world. And I know of people who've, you know, had chronic illness start the Gwers and no longer are sick. Now it's I think just beautiful. Salve says, carved my way out of the cave over 40 years ago. Been trying to sharpen my blunt chisels ever since. So, I love that. So I think it's beautiful. Yeah. But that's what the teachings allow us. And I think that's, for me in my own path, that I'm much more grounded and much more confident. And I've been in, you know, as a client for years in my own therapy as well. And Druidry allowed me, again, stand in confidence about who I am and my place in the world. Oh, and loads of shadows still, and there constantly will be. Pat says, sometimes you step out, but sometimes you go in. And this is a quotation from Krishnamurti. When I understand myself, I understand you. And out of that understanding comes love. Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we have to, as Blake says, we have to work on ourselves before we can better serve others. It's all part of Druidry. And of course, what's really, really important is Druidry, one of the important strands of Druidry is about being of service. However that manifests itself. It doesn't matter how it is, but it's about finding your own way of being of service. That gives you so much more meaning.
Absolutely. But there's also something I wanted to share. You know, you speak of courage, and that's really important. But the example of the crab letting go of its shell and then hiding under a stone, that resonated quite deeply with me, because that period of vulnerability of the old beliefs not working and the new beliefs haven't set in. That sense of that was quite heavy and crashing and felt really dangerous. So yeah, just courage and vulnerability is again that sort of paradox. You need the vulnerability to take the next step. You need the courage, but then you feel a lot more vulnerable once you've done that. It's such a journey, isn't it, Eimear?
Absolutely. And Tina says, being vulnerable can be scary. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, when you're being courageous, you don't feel courageous. You feel scared, because that's what courage is. If you're not scared, or you're not, you don't. Courage can't happen without fear. You know, it's if you've never been threatened and you're confident all the time, then that's not courageous. That's just being. So, and Stephanie says, I think a lot of us live through that shedding phase often in our lives. You know, it's a bit like a snake. And I suppose like the crab is constantly growing, and snakes do that. They shed their skin and they have to go, you know, between the rock and the hard place. And that again is that vulnerability in order to move on. And I absolutely. And it keeps us alive. And if we hold on to our old shell or our old skin, we stay confined and stuck. And sometimes there's that temptation in times of uncertainty to cling on to old beliefs. And I mean, I know I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and that is a religion unlike Protestantism, from my view, is that you don't question anything. So Catholics, good Catholics, don't interpret the Bible. Protestants can. And from a Catholic point of view, that's the big mistake with the Protestants, because there's so many Protestant churches, because they can't agree, because they interpret it in their own way. But with Catholicism, there's one way. I'm talking about Roman Catholicism, not the other Anglicanism or Greek or Russian or whatever it is. And that you cling on to certainty, and at times, and fundamentalist views, whatever it is, and they just keep us trapped. And it's just lovely to be able to, but then it's scary.
Yeah.
And then if you're in a culture that doesn't allow, like your family rejects you or just isn't happy because you're stepping out of, you pay a big price for that too. So it's but you know, if there's I don't know if you believe in a last day, but if you ever were called to account for yourself, all you'll have to be able to say is, I did this myself. I needed to do this, rather than saying, well, my parents didn't allow it, or the local chief of the community, or whatever it is, we weren't allowed. It's like, I have to be able to say, whatever my choice is, I chose it, but it was my doing, not anybody else's. And if we can come to that, then we have that sense of agency, even if it is to stay in the cave. But I'm choosing to do this for myself. Nobody's making me. I think even at that is important.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. I mean, that sense of choice, that yes, I want to be in the cave. I know what's outside, but I want this, and that's okay as well.
Yeah. So yeah. So what's the most reckless thing you've done? Come to Ireland. Apart from that.
Oh dear. I know it's really interesting. Well, it's not really. I think I played life quite safe, and I was a very nice boy growing up. I used to have the awards to prove it, but then I threw them away. I think the most reckless thing I've done unconsciously is not always understand the impact of what I do on other people. I think.
Repeat that again.
So I think my recklessness came in the form of not thinking that I'm doing something quite nice, but it not necessarily feeling the same for other people. So my own ideas of what's nice and what's good and what's right and wrong often were hard on other people.
Okay.
And that's what I would say. Unconsciously, I thought I was doing all the right things, but it took me, the most monumental effort was deconstructing my ideas of right and wrong.
Ooh, okay.
And I was most angry with myself. It felt that I had lived a certain aspect of my life, or I had not fully expressed myself growing up, because I was so much into my meditation and my yoga, my philosophy, and always, I suppose, validated for being this really mature kid. But I wish I was more reckless. In fact, I had a dream when I was in St. Andrews that I was talking to one of my friends there, and we were discussing past life or evolution in my dream, because we used to talk about that all the time anyway. But in the dream, she asked me, if you could live your life again, what would you do differently? And in my dream, I said I would take myself a lot less seriously.
Yeah.
So I have another decent amount of years, I think, ahead to be more reckless. So I fully look forward to that.
Well, it's. I've done reckless things that I knew were the right thing to do, but would have been reckless for somebody else, or somebody else thought I was being reckless. And I go, but I had the best possible outcome. It was the right thing. And I think sometimes it's taking a risk. I'm not talking about going, what do you call this thing? My stepson used to do it, car surfing, I wouldn't do that. That's reckless. But I've taken risks that one example, I met Howard, my husband. I was 9 months separated and he was 9 months widowed, and I was in therapy at the time, and I was going to wait 2 years before I got involved with anybody else. I was going to be sensible. I didn't. I met him and we went out a month later, and then 7 months later we got married. Now, that is a crazy thing to do. Best thing ever. So it's that you wouldn't recommend that to somebody. To take your time. You're going to be caught in the rebound. It's going to be a big mistake. No, it wasn't. So it's one of those mad
My
things.
recklessness aren't comparable to that. The closest that comes is I went to an education fair to get prospectus on film schools and came out with international relation brochures.
Okay. Hey, I was, Lisa, lucky, fortunate, very, very lucky. It is, and it was a really great relationship. Unfortunately, he's not here anymore. But I was very, very lucky. And my first husband was 4.5 years together before we got married, and then we lasted 14 years. So there's no right way of doing things, but it's about I suppose listening to yourself and trusting that. Because for years I didn't trust myself. If somebody said it's sunshine and I would see it dark, and I go, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Where I learned to my cost the hard way, that if I don't listen to my gut, I suffer. So I've it's around trusting my gut. And even and that's the challenge, is like when all around you is saying no, 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 no. It's like all I can do is listen to this. So, yeah. So, what are you grateful for?
I'm at the moment, I'm just grateful to be here, to be alive, to be able to experience this. And I genuinely mean that. It's bringing such a smile to my face, just experiencing this. I'm
When
grateful.
you say this, you mean your life right now?
My life right now, our conversation right now, the way...
Right at the moment, okay.
Honestly, I'm really grateful for being aware and conscious and being able to live more truly to myself. That's a gift. I feel that opportunity. I've lived 35 years on this earth, and I feel like now begins that time to really live, because I kind of know my feet are on the ground and I feel them. My heart resonates with other people and I feel that. The sense of being alive is what I'm really grateful for. This opportunity to perhaps enjoy this journey as long as I can, and make more and more new discoveries, but live fundamentally.
When I was 35, it was a really challenging time in my life, and I wanted to retire, and I was exhausted. And I'm just listening to you, and you saying, how settled and trusting you are within yourself. And I go, oh, no, I mean, everybody has their own journey, and I'm very happy in my skin now. But and at 35, I was happier than I had been when I was 25. So my life has gotten easier and better as I go along. But just when I think of 35 was a hard year for me, and just listening to you saying how you can stand or in your own shoes and on the ground, I'd be so grateful, and to have had done so much reflection and discovering and continuing to discover. That's wonderful. It's just lovely to hear it.
Thank you. It just feels like it's okay to be me, with my mistakes, with my faults, with my recklessness, with my completely nerd head sometimes. But I love this chance to be me and connect with other people. So.
It's beautiful. So when you think of the modern world now and the way we are, what concerns you about it?
Honestly, Eimear, the one thing which really concerns me is that we don't see each other. We don't have a story. We're losing a sense of common mythology, common story, that chance to connect with each other and see each other. Without that,
are you talking about literally see each other? Or are you talking about metaphorically see each other?
Psychologically, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, that sense of letting people be and discover their truth without wanting to put them in boxes as defined by us, or how they should be. That's really dangerous. If we can just let people be themselves, I think the world can turn out quite beautifully. I mean, it is beautiful, but it's also the ability to see each other. It's hard to describe what I mean by that, but to see the mind of another person, to connect. It's like seeing the trees. It's like talking to the trees. When you connect with them, but you might find it hard to say what that means. That's missing. And we don't often want to go below superficial conversations and really get to talk to people at an emotional level or at a spiritual level. In everyday conversations, we miss out. And without that connecting with each other, we can't really connect with the living planet, which is not as vocal as us, perhaps.
Okay, if nobody's asked this question, but could you suggest how one could do that? What small thing could any of us do to see another?
I'm trying to feel for an answer. My mind's gone blank. And I think the only way I could answer that question is to say, be with another person and let them be. Don't try to change them. Don't try to change yourself. Just be and let that experience come and see how that feels. Ask questions. Ask people how they feel. Tell people how you feel. Sometimes we can get in the place of assuming that, he must be thinking this or she must be thinking this, or I'm not going to tell them how I feel. But I think that's where we miss out that connection. I think I think I know what to say. Being curious about other people and yourself is the way to see them.
You said it just before me. We're talking about respectful curiosity or having a fascination for somebody. Not because you have a title and you do this kind of work or wherever it is, but to have that fascination with somebody regardless of their life. And I think that's really important. Now, we've got some answers here which is thank you for this. Julie says, from my experience, letting others be. It's natural for some people, a learning journey for others, and a thing some will never understand. But I think it's about being. Pat says, sit still and make the effort to look. And take ourselves out of the way. I think that's a really important one. And David says, an online big hug for Aman for Aman. You're a huggable human being. There's some wonderful comments about you. We'll have to look at those later.
Thank you.
Wait a second, I'll just see some others. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just getting coming down here. And someone says, such wisdom. I could listen to Aman all night. I think that's great. It's lovely. So you have a gift. Aman, this is from Salve. Have you gifted yourself the precious time to fully immerse and lose yourself in remote landscapes? Please take time to explore as Eru's sacred soils play host to a glorious, ever-forgiving goddess cloak. That was just a little bit off there. But Tina says, I don't think people have much tolerance these days, even though we're supposedly more tolerant. Well, that's so true. Too much instant. We need a slow club. It's I think that's a really interesting, talk about the slow food movement, which is, different to the fast food movement, that there's something around that slowing down and the being rather than the doing. And I come back to listening to others and being curious about them rather than putting them into a little box. I think that's really, really important. And, it's a great trick for somebody who has social anxiety, who's worried about, am I making a good impression on you? Get out of your way and just listen to the other person and become fascinated by them and put the focus on all of them rather than on yourself. And that can actually make it easier on yourself, but also a great joy, because then you're discovering really, really interesting other people. It's so lovely to do that, Yeah. And I suppose as a psychologist, that I'm always fascinated with people's stories, and I'm really lucky to be able to having these chats, because I'm learning so much about people. I mean, you've been in my house, but this is the first time we've had a really in-depth conversation, because sometimes loads of other people, and I'm getting these insights into people every week, and I just absolutely love it. And I'm thinking that the gold in people's stories and the wisdom and the insights they offer. And when I started doing this, it was just, these are ordinary members of the order who are not known as an ordinary. And to find the extraordinariness that just comes out each week, it's just mind-blowing. So
it's such a precious opportunity. Yeah. And as far as the ordinary member is concerned, my go-to line always is, my name is Aman, which is a man, I'm just a man.
Oh, it's wonderful. So David asks, you're in Ireland, aren't you? Yes, you're in Dublin. And have you visited any ancient sites? Well, Glendalough is one. What others have you visited?
Newgrange.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came here, I did one of the, I'm sorry to say this, but it was fun at the time. I did one of the sacred tours of Ireland.
Okay.
Which was lovely, except I would do it differently on my own.
A nice taster.
It was a nice taster. It was a lovely taster. And so that's where I went. Newgrange, one of the first things I did when I came here, but I haven't seen as much as I would like. So that's definitely on the list.
There's so many, and I'm still hearing about other sites that I've never heard of. And I think there are the Tara, Newgrange, Loch Crew, and then you have the ones in Sligo, Sligo is just magical. Have to go there. And then there's Cork, and then there's here, and then there's as soon as you start listing them, and then there's more and more and more and more that are. I think what's lovely is we have, I think, Monumental Ireland, and we have Mythical Ireland, and various. There's things on Facebook that people are now. David Halpin is another person, talks about sacred sites and bringing them into the public eye, that they're more and more present to us now, and more are being discovered as people. They're there, people who have known them, but then people just study them a bit more and then share them with others. That get an ordnance survey map of Ireland, and you see it's full of red dots, that there's some kind of monument there. It may be a standing stone, a passage tomb, or a Fulucht Fee or something, but they're there. And I mean, we're talking about Ireland here, but I mean, you certainly have them all over Europe, in the UK as well. It's brilliant. And I was in Brittany with a few members in 2019, and went to Karnak and Gavrini and all sorts of other places, you know, and it's just pure magic that, as Stephanie says, so jealous of you all casually going to these beautiful ancient sites all over the world. I love hearing about it. You know what it is? I just see so fortunate I am to be able to visit these. So in South Kilkenny, which is only 40 minutes drive from me, we have Knockrow Passage Tomb, 2 passage tombs aligned to the winter solstice, one to the sunrise and one to the sunset. And it is just as important as Newgrange. It doesn't look as dramatic as Newgrange, but really, really important part of our history. And that's here. And then somebody else says, what about that one? And this, and it's everywhere. It's just lovely. I'm very, very lucky. Julie, I know you're in Australia. Hopefully you will get to see them. Anyway, so what gives you hope when you talk about, you know, you wishing that people would be able to see each other? What gives you hope about the modern world?
I just feel that I meet absolutely wonderful people all the time. And that gives me hope that we can connect with each other. There is growing awareness, there's new consciousness. But I'm not always hopeful. Sometimes I feel quite scared and I feel quite uncertain. What does give me hope is it's possible. And I know that it's possible. And if it's possible, there's hope. So
yeah. And Ben Whelan says, we still have love. This is hope. And I think so. And I think one of my wishes for 2022 is that we will practice more love and compassion for others. I think that's for me, because I think there's been a lot of divisiveness and I felt a lot of sadness this last year, and to bring in more compassion and less othering, but whatever the opposite of othering is, I don't know what another word, to bring people in. And David says that your vibe attracts your tribe. That's really interesting. So my last question, because we're coming to almost our 2-hour mark.
Yeah.
My question is, what is your favorite season now in Ireland, or maybe you can talk about in India? And I don't know what the weather was like. You were there in December. And what is your favorite ceremony, you know, or festival when you think about the Wheel of the Year?
Well, the season without a shadow of a doubt has to be winter for me. Absolutely love winter. It makes me so happy.
You talking about an Irish winter, not an Indian winter, or
in Delhi, the winter gets as cold as about 6 degrees.
So, okay.
So I'm talking about the cold winters.
Okay.
So Irish winter. I love the Irish. I love right now, for example. I love the crisp air. I love the dark skies. I like it when there's less light. So I like the longer days. So the winter solstice is very powerful and magical for me. But I also really like the change from autumn into winter, that transition.
Going into the darker.
Yes, going into the darkness. Yes.
That's beautiful. Oh, wonderful. I mean, I like all seasons. I find the hardest transition from summer into autumn. But once I get into autumn, I love the winter solstice. I love the darkness.
Yes.
But I also love the energy of summer. And I love the fact that it doesn't get dark until 11 p.m. I just love that because I have more energy. So I also like snow. People are talking about snow. Snow is the best, Hannah. Where I am, it's not often. I've had 2 white Christmases in my life. The second one when I was 3, and the second one was 2010. So it doesn't stay on where I am. On doesn't stay long on the ground. So and I think it's 9 degrees here today and wet, and it's going to get colder tomorrow, I believe. But this time of year is so magical. It is. And then somebody I want my Summerland. So it's like, that's David loves the sun. I suppose what I appreciate is the diversity and the fact that we have 4 seasons living here. Now, Irish people complain. They're terrible for complaining about the weather. As you may have noticed, they're always talking about it. And people say, no, I want to get to a sun holiday. I just love that cold, breathing in that cold, clean air. And I love the freshness. Stephanie says, let's all do house swap vacations through the seasons. Plenty of snow here in Utah, and I've never been in Utah. So just wonderful. And lots of snow, minus 25 degrees in Canada. Jane Myatt was one of my earlier guests on. She talks about, and I think was it last year, it was something like minus 40. And she has to go out every day, maybe a few times in the day, to feed her animals. She's got donkeys and horses. And this is so easy in comparison. So listen, we've gone over, well, we're over 2 hours now. So Aman, it's been just a joy talking to you. We could keep talking more and more and more and more. And I just love the interaction with our viewers, because there's so many comments, and unfortunately didn't get to look at all of them. Sometimes they come really, really fast. So it's been just a joy talking to you. And
it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I mean, it's such a privilege to be here and with you and everyone who's joined today. Thank you so much for the kindness.
And it's been a great response. So what you and I will do when I say goodbye, we will go and look at the comments ourselves, because there's so many. So you're going to go into backstage, and then I'll just say goodbye to everybody until next week. So lovely talking.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So listen, thank you all for joining us and for the wonderful comments. And it's just lovely to have that interaction. And Lisa, it's lovely to say just what you needed to hear today. And I'm always struck by how, whoever I have, that there's always somebody who really, really resonates with what my guest has said. So it's part of the magic, the dríocht, the magic of Druidry. And so it's just so lovely to have you all here today. And I look forward to, it's funny, a number of people saying this is the first Fireside Chat of 2022. Yes, it is. It kind of hadn't dawned on me, and I think it's a lovely start, and maybe continue to have wonderful Fireside Chats as we go ahead into 2022. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat. In the meantime, have a good week, be well, be safe, and slán go fóill.